essence of a legal professional in your mind?
I don't think it's the narrow view we get from television and from the movies of that hard-hitting, zealous advocate. What I don't like about that, and that, well, Lisa, you have to be available all the time, is just don't forget there are boundaries.
What do you think is like one of the biggest weaknesses of our group of students that are entering the current legal profession?
Go back to that, why did you come to law school in the first place? Not what do you want to be, what kind of lawyer do you want to be. Why did you come here? You came for a reason. You'll stay open, stay curious, stay open to learning, learn from others. And don't be a jerk like some of those jerks we've been reading about, you know,
In class.
in
Yeah.
class.
But Professor, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
The first question I'd like to ask, since you are a legal profession professor, is, and this is a very, very light question to start off with,
Okay.
I guess, maybe.
Promise.
Thank you, promise. Yeah. What is the essence of a legal professional in your mind?
Wow. I'm not sure that's a light question.
Yeah. A little bit of a misrepresentation.
I think a legal professional, is a lot of things. I don't think it's the narrow view we get from television and from the movies of that hard-hitting, zealous advocate, aggressive, or, willing to literally die for a cause. Although that could be. But I think a legal professional to me is someone who certainly knows the law, of course, but also knows how to conduct themselves in a professional, respectful manner. And what I mean by that, because you're constantly dealing with perhaps stakeholders, clients, other lawyers, the regulator, maybe you work for a corporation with government, but also someone who I think is super interested in the work that they do.
Right.
It could be a mom and pop shop, it could be a corporation, it could be a huge business in some sort of multi-million-dollar, merger.
Yeah.
It could be an individual who's been hit by a car and really has incredibly heavily impacted their life, right? But people who really care about what they do, whatever aspect of law that is, and again, that could be working in tribunals, being counsel at a regulator, working in private law, public law, corporate law, for corporations, for governments, and I think someone who, generally to me, communicates well,
Right.
is respectful, who thinks before they speak, doesn't jump to conclusions, has some sense of logic. That's the starting point anyway.
Fair. That's a good place to start.
And in fairness, I think a legal professional is so many things and can be so many things.
Fair.
And if I could just add, often students or potential students will say, well, what's a good background to get into law? What courses
Right.
should I take? And I said, well, there's no requirement, so that's a good thing. And quite frankly, don't think that you must take only political science or only criminology. And if you took music or architecture or biology, that you're somehow at a disadvantage. Because the law impacts everything, and everything impacts law. So the more diverse backgrounds and people backgrounds, not just education, bring it, because that to me is the full, a legal professional isn't just that old white guy you
Isn't
see
just
on
Better
TV.
Call Saul or Harvey Specter? Yeah, that's not.
No, please.
Yeah. 100% for sure.
I guess the question I have to that point though is, well, you have so many people coming from diverse backgrounds. How do you sort of standardize what professionalism means, right? I mean, let's say someone's coming from science, or someone's coming from political science, or someone has a background in teaching. And sure, people might be passionate about law and policy, but I think passion only takes us so far, especially based off of what we've learned in class. I think being passionate is one thing, but having the standard of professionalism based off of the diverse backgrounds we have, how do we establish that? What does that look like?
That's a really good question. And it is a good question that has come up in our class this term, right? The legal profession. And I like that it's called the legal profession, because I refer to it as sort of the legal profession / professional ethics.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the first class, I said, like, what does it mean to be a legal professional? And quite frankly, that's where we're going to start tonight. Again, you know,
Right.
it's like, do we know? Are we more confused? But you raise a really good question, Ira, that with diversity and backgrounds. And I think, to me, maybe the essence is, you know, what our rules of professional conduct say. And I know this sounds like a cop-out. But just this idea of law, being a legal professional is about service, servicing your clients. You know, you are doing a service. They rely on your expertise and your knowledge. And also that to me comes with great responsibility. So a recognition of that responsibility.
Right.
The idea of civility and integrity. I think those are huge to me. You know, because people say, well, what is a professional? What is professionalism? It's like, well, you're members of a profession. How does that help us?
Yeah.
Right? But in law, and I think we've talked about this, there's this perception, and perhaps it's real, you know, based on history, that, well, if you're a lawyer, you must know a lot. You'll be able to help me with anything.
Master of all trades.
Sure,
Yeah.
and this respect and status, rightly or wrongly, but I still get comments, you folks certainly, I'm sure, already do and will, but I think it's just as I'm being reasoned, reasonable, rational. You can be a zealous advocate, you can, but to me, this sense of you take your role seriously,
Right.
you understand your impact, you know, vis-a-vis your clients, but also society at large. We've talked about the administration of justice. We're part of
Yes.
something bigger than just ourselves, right? And accountable to a regulator and part of a profession with quite a history, right? And I think that's really something to be proud of, but also protect.
Right.
I'd love to learn more about your background just as a lawyer and before you got into teaching. Sort of walk us through your journey into your legal practice prior to becoming a professor.
Okay. Well,
Very light questions, very.
I'll try not to bore you with the details or give you too long an
That's
answer,
okay.
but I will go back to high school.
Okay.
Where there were a lot of subjects. You know, I loved school and I liked my biology class, I loved my teacher, and, you know, I thought of teaching. And then for some reason I got interested in law, and I can't honestly remember exactly why. But from a very early age, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to write, and I wanted to tell stories. So then, late high school, I was like, should I go to journalism? Maybe law. And my uncle, who was a professor, not law, said, well, you know, you pretty much need something before you go to law school anyway, Lisa, so if you're interested in journalism, start there and see. Fair enough, good advice. And in my journalism program, which I loved, we had to take a media law course.
Interesting.
And the buzz from all the students were like, oh, it's boring, it's dry, it's terrible, you know, but you have to take it.
Yeah.
And now this was the 1980s, early 1980s.
Okay.
And so it covered things, basically what you need to know as a working journalist. So things about defamation, slander, a little bit of privacy law, even though I'm not sure how much privacy law actually existed in those days. We read Lady Chatterley's Lover, and we looked at the controversy and censorship. And I'm sure I didn't understand most of it, but I just thought it was fascinating. So I took another course, just because, and it ended up being more of a political science media course, and it was about who owns the airwaves. And so it was about broadcast policy.
Oh.
And satellite policy.
Like
and
CRTC type stuff.
CRTC,
Wow,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is super interesting. So that's really what spurred me to go on to law school. And I came to law school here at Windsor Law in 1988, fully intending to go off and be a media lawyer. That was my plan.
That's sort of
Wow.
where sometimes I thought when I was in journalism school, the same trajectory.
That was my plan. Either that, or I was going to go be a great journalist who you know covered the law.
Wow.
And then that didn't quite work out because I realized that media law and defamation and censorship and working for a newspaper was a very, very small, you know, legal community
Right.
and hard to break into. But I did work as a journalist for a bit. But then in law school, of course, I came to love other courses like tort law. I loved tort law. I loved legal research and writing because it was a lot like journalism, you know, who, what, where, when, why, how, forget the adjectives, keep
Yeah.
it short,
Right.
be concise. So, you know, it just kind of flourished from there. And then I ended up practicing for 15 years.
Wow.
15 years in law.
So how did you make the pivot from actual practice to teaching?
Oh, see, I don't want to be honest about that. I got sick of practice. I'd had enough. But you know what? It wasn't that. It was, I think, in fairness, I always had teaching in the back of my mind. And when I graduated from Windsor Law, I had some fabulous professors, many of whom were still here 8 years ago when I came back to teach. And I had something in the back of my mind that one day I was coming back to Windsor Law to teach, somehow, in some capacity. But I practiced for 15 years, honestly, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, and I worked with some really lovely, wonderful lawyers of all ages and, years of experience. And then I just kind of got tired of it. It just felt like the same old thing. But in the midst of that, I had done a master's degree in law, in intellectual property law, because it was the closest thing I could get to copyright and artist rights.
The copyrights, trademarks, stuff like that, yeah.
Did a little bit of patent work. And then it really just so happened that there was an opportunity to teach night class. Someone in my firm was a law clerk, and it was a law clerk. I'm like, sure, I'll teach. Yeah, great. And I loved it. So I kind of tried to do both for a bit. And I thought, you know what? 15 years of practice, fabulous. I think it's time to switch to teaching. And I ended up teaching full-time. Again, kind of fell into it through somebody who knew somebody. And I was teaching part-time, teaching full-time in the paralegal program, at first at Seneca, but then at Sheridan College for 9 years. And in the meantime, I had met a professor here, Professor Gemma Smith.
Wow.
And I thought she was fabulous. And just, of course, some of the work I was doing. And then I found there was a one-year posting for legal research and writing. Professor Curis was going to be off on sabbatical.
Wow.
And I thought, this is it. 1 year. Perfect. And that's what I came, my one-year contract, in 2017.
Wow. That's incredible. And so, going back to your days in practice, curious, you were mentioning sort of the 80s, and when I'm thinking media law, like I had a very similar path. In terms of I went to journalism school.
Yeah.
The only highest mark I got was in media law. And I'm trying to think of, like you mentioned, it was a different time back then in terms of what the standard was in terms of newspapers, coverage, things like that. And it had me thinking, what would you say was the difference in climate in terms of just practicing law back then versus just the challenges you see practicing law now?
Oh, well, the main one, and this is real, I think it was whenever we have the career day, was that March, February?
Somewhere early March, yeah.
And so I was doing some other work with the dean here on a project, and so we were talking to a lot of our alumni who, were here to come back for career day. And one in particular I know quite well, and she was helping me with coach the tort law moot. And I asked her, I said, what do you think, it was something new that, new lawyers face today that she's about 10 years, graduated about 10 years after me. I said, but maybe you didn't face, and certainly I wouldn't have, having graduated in 1991. And I guess this is related to my first thought. We didn't have an internet. We didn't have email. We didn't have voicemail. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't type our own letters. Like, there was no such thing. So that was number one, which sounds archaic. But it goes with the second point, where she said, well, the difference, Lisa, today is, she said, you have to be responsive to your clients at any time. She says, there's no more 9 to 5. And I said, what are you talking about? Excuse me. And she said, well, if they text you or email you at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. because they've got a thought and they want something in the morning, you need to be responsive. And I said, excuse my language, that's bullshit. And she said, no, you don't understand. She said, they'll go somewhere else. I said, then let them. And she said, but that's what they expect, and that's what they demand. So we don't have any choice. And I said, I disagree, even though I haven't practiced for a number of years. I said, because you, the profession, have created that expectation. Wow. You've allowed it. I said, unless it's life and death, why do you need to answer at 9 p.m.? Like, is your entire, and she said,
existence on the line for it? Yeah.
Lisa, you just don't understand. And I left I left it at that. I didn't want to push. And I thought, wow, I think my final comment was, good thing I'm not still practicing. But then, I'm not in my 20s or my 30s or in my first years of practice. And of course, you're hungry for clients. There's competition. You want to make your clients happy. Of course. I mean, I remember calling people at 6 o'clock thinking, as I'm about to leave and thinking, oh, I'll never catch them, but at least I can now leave a voicemail. This was, in the 2000s. And sometimes they would be there, rarely, but at least for me, that was my sorry, but I just wanted to get back to you, before.
Just a method of communication,
so
the standard,
But it's, I guess, different now, and so that's maybe just a simple thing. It's just a communication thing. It's just a way of working. But the biggest things, I think fundamentally, probably not a lot has changed.
Okay.
But I do think that students get probably, because they demand, probably a broader, maybe a broader, richer education. I think my group were a little more, that's what the professor says, that's what you take.
Right.
Whereas I think students say, well, I want this, and what about that? There's way more things to be involved in as students, which is fabulous, all the groups and this. And so students seem much more, not eager to learn, but there are more opportunities, I think, and take advantage of more opportunities to learn. And I think the firms also have become, not everyone has to be that white guy, who shows up in the navy blue suit. Like they realize diversity of students from experience to education to jobs. I'd rather hire a student who's planted trees and, had to endure the elements and bears and insects than someone who said, well, I don't know, I did lots of research for my professor for 4 years. Not that there's anything wrong with doing research for your professor, but to me, which one did you learn more about survival and adaptation and flexibility? And those are just silly examples. Nothing wrong with, of course, working for a professor. I did it and loved it, for a summer. I checked footnotes. He was writing a manuscript, a book. I checked footnotes the entire summer. Wow. And it was all media law stuff and tort law.
Interesting.
And I loved it. It was all defamation. Loved it. So I don't know what has changed, but I think the firms are much more aware of this breadth and depth and richness of students and different backgrounds and experiences. And I think the firms, from what I know, have done a way better job of doing more outreach and getting to know prospective students and summer roles. And so I think that's all good stuff.
That's amazing.
That's really interesting. I think one of the things that you brought up was, if there's, why do you have to respond to that email, or why do you have to respond to that Teams message at 9 p.m.? But as a student who's hearing that, I'm like, well, my career ends.
That's the standard, right? For us, I guess.
Yeah, it is. It totally is.
No, I understand.
And so it's, this is a profession that's truly rooted in tradition, and so how do you see there any sort of change being made, right? It is difficult for it to ever start at the student role, and it would have to start with groups of people who really hold power in the profession to create change. And it made me think a little bit about this new LSO decision that's coming up. We talked about it in class, but I think people would really benefit from hearing about it on this podcast as well. Getting rid of the bar. That's a huge change.
Wow, yeah.
Open forum, even to you, Mo. What do you think about it? I know we talked about it. In my opinion, I think testing is important, but I think testing the competency of lawyers doesn't come from the bar itself. I think they should mandate clinics in law school, and I think that competency testing should happen earlier on instead of getting rid of the bar altogether. But that's my opinion.
100%.
I think practice still requires rigor, but I don't know. That's my particular opinion.
There's validity in that for sure.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like it's being watered down. I feel like standards are being watered down, and I don't know.
Yeah.
On the LSO, maybe you can put in a little bit of a word.
A little bit about LSO cases, maybe, I don't know.
No, first of all, I think it's a huge step that they're considering doing away with the bar exam and doing competency-based testing. I think that's fabulous. And it's not new necessarily out west. They're sort of the western provinces.
Yes. They're
doing something like that.
Are the last to adopt
That's
it.
right. We have the the LPP program that's kind of built into Lincoln Alexander at Toronto Metropolitan University.
IPC.
I think they don't even need to article, I think, after they graduate.
Yeah, what is it called? Sorry,
IPC.
IPC, I'm sorry. What did I call it?
LPC.
Oh, that's the other one, I think. That's the alternative route to articling.
Maybe.
I think with our business associations class, LLP, LPC, all of it is all over the place. I totally.
No,
totally
I shouldn't
fine.
have used
That's fine.
But let's go back and we'll call it the sort of built-in skills-based practical skills,
practical stuff,
such that when you leave law school, you don't then need to go article.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have no problem with articling, but I think there's always been this. Well, you learn law, and it's a liberal legal education at law school, and then you learn the practical skills in articling. But I think the firms have always said, well, hold on, we still need, they still need to come to us, the students need to come to us with some foundational, fundamental understanding of law. So I'm with you, Ira. If I taught, the more I teach, I think the less traditionally I teach. I don't think of it that way, but sitting here talking to you folks and thinking about how I was taught as a law student, And not that there was anything wrong with it, but people, you tend to do things the same way.
Right.
And for me, it's so much more about, let's make it project-based, let's go outside and look at what we're talking about. And I think there are a lot of professors here who do that kind of thing. And it's hard to learn skills in a classroom. So you're right, experiential learning. Everyone should do an externship, in my view. Everyone should have the opportunity to work in a clinic. Sometimes that's just a question of resources. We have a lot of students. Do you have that many, can you secure that many positions? Mm-hmm. How much time? That's a rejigging of the curriculum.
Right.
We only have, 8 or 9 required courses, but there are lots of other great courses that I still look at and say, oh, I wish I could have taken that course. When I was in school, there was no such course. But you're right. And I think your other question was, how does it change? Obviously the students can say, no, I'm not answering my phone after 6 p.m.
Right.
But I remember when I first started, and there was a lawyer. He was about 3 or 4 years older than me. And he left, I think it was every Thursday, he left at 5 o'clock because he liked to pick up basketball. Mm-hmm. And that was his thing, and he was determined, and he did it. And I remember thinking, wow, that's something.
Yeah.
No way I can do that as an articling student or a first-year associate or a second-year associate. But then after a while, and it won't take you long, you'll be like, hold on a second. We are now that group of 8, 10, 12 years out. We're the ones hiring the students, hiring the summer students.
Right.
Why can't we do things differently? Why can't we suggest? And a lot of it does depend on the practice area and who your clients are.
Right.
Right? And if you have international clients, of course, you have to worry about time change. So maybe you do have to be available at midnight, which kind of sucks. But,
just depends on the nature of the practice, I guess.
So it depends on the nature of the practice. I think, to me, what I don't like about that, and that, Lisa, you have to be available all the time, is just don't forget there are boundaries for people, right? And I think that's what leads to burnout. And it's tough. And I think it can be tough on students. And I don't think, like I said, I think the firms are so much better at recognizing they have all kinds of, student, like the big firms particularly, they have professional development people and
there's people dedicated to the development.
And, it's awesome. It's rich and it's full of good experiences. Yeah.
Great. And you know what? When they bring you, they don't want you to burn out. They don't want you to say, screw this. I met someone years ago. She, again, was a few years older. It was my 3rd or 4th year of practice. And she worked for one of the big firms. Oh, she's tax law or something. I remember telling a friend and I, she said, hang in there. I was like, how's it going? We're like, And she said, hang in there. She says, I hated practicing law for the first 7 years. And I thought, are you out of your mind?
That's a long time to...
I'm not doing something for 7 years and disliking it, hoping that by the 8th year it'll get better.
Yeah.
And she stayed and she went on, and I thought, wow, that is not me. But you know what I also think? There are so many ways to be that legal professional.
Right.
And I know we think it's only going to a private firm or going to a corporation or working for a municipality or in a government department. But there's so much else. You can get into policy. You can get into other government work, tribunal work. You can work in businesses where maybe you're not quote unquote practicing law, but you're essentially being that legal professional in so many other ways. Insurance companies, banking, banks, financial institutions. So I think you find what interests you and you also kind of develop into the lawyer you are. And I think mentorship is a huge thing, which we were talking about, I think, in class there a couple of weeks ago. That's not necessarily, Mo, you're assigned to Ira. Ira, Mo's your mentee and you're the mentor. Because maybe you and I just casually have conversations, or you and I, and so you kind of find those people and sometimes you emulate them. Sometimes you say, wow, I'm not going to be a lawyer like you. Thank you for the example of what not to be. But I think, again, in class I told you I went back to the firm I articled at. So I joined them in 1991. After I graduated, I stayed to 93. Didn't leave of my own volition, but that's okay. And went back, was invited to their 90th anniversary a couple months ago. And I thought, well, isn't that funny? And I went. And, because I thought, there were a lot of people there I really liked. And I had the opportunity to say, hey, thanks. You were a big influence on me. You know what?
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Never really had the opportunity to thank you. But I still remember X, Y, and Z. It had been 30 years since I saw most of these people. And I was so happy to see them.
Right.
And I left and I thought, isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Right? were the first lawyers who really launched me on my career as a legal professional. I mean, after Windsor Law, and I learned a lot from a lot of them, and I was able to say, "Yo, thank you. You're a decent guy then. You're a decent guy now. You were lovely. Thank you."
Yeah.
And there were little things, not necessarily the cases,
Right.
Yeah.
the odd thing, but just little lessons you learned, or how they treated us as students,
Yeah.
or didn't, right?
Yeah. Sometimes osmosis can be the biggest way to learn in
Sure.
certain cases.
And they, you know, I think I get a little more, single-minded as I get older, but I also think you mellow a little bit too. But to me, is really is almost like, I don't want to say don't let people tell you to do this, and me telling you is telling you what to do. But I just think find your way and don't be afraid to try. All like new young lawyers, find those people you can rely on and trust and have conversations with. Do good work, of course, but don't be afraid to ask questions either, because nobody expects you to know it all.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know it all. People
100%.
ask me all sorts of stuff about law. I don't know. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I'm not a family lawyer. I'm not a securities lawyer. I don't want to be. Don't ask me. Like I can point you to
You're the
something you
second
can
professor
read.
this week I've heard say they don't want to get into securities. So.
I don't even know what it is, but it just sounds,
Yeah.
So I think when you come out, you think you have to be everything and know everything.
Yeah.
Nobody expects that,
Mhm.
right? And I think that comes back to honesty, integrity, civility.
Right.
Just, you don't have to agree with everybody, and you can state that, but you don't have to be,
Going on in sort of reflecting on your teaching career, we essentially had breaking news in one sense just before we started filming that this will be your last semester teaching.
I know.
Here, for now.
For now, I guess at Windsor.
Right.
What would you say, having been a lawyer for as long as you have been, and even just having experience teaching paralegal programs, law students, what would you say is the biggest element of this profession you wish law students could understand now that took you a couple years to really understand and grasp in your career?
That's a very good question. Honestly, I think if I had to give you one, be yourself. Stay true to yourself. Stay true to yourself and find out. We don't know what our
That's
legal
so
professional
hard.
self
Yeah.
is, but it is hard. But I always say this. I'll elaborate a little bit, especially when I taught legal research and writing. That's a tough course because students come in and like, what is
Right.
this citations and what are you talking about? And I remember asking a class one day. I said, well, don't be so hard on yourselves. I said, why do you expect to know this? It's only like week 4. And they looked at me like, well, and I said, give yourself time to learn it. It's okay. Have you been to law school before, any of you? And they all looked at me like, well, of course not, Professor. What a stupid question, I said, then give yourself time to learn. I said, but also, don't get so frustrated, because I can see it. When you teach students, you can see it. This one's in tears after class because she doesn't understand anything. This one's upset because he's lonely and misses his family. And they're going to fail, and maybe law school was a mistake. And I said, whoa. Hold on. And I think this helps answer your question. Go back to that, why did you come to law school in the first place? Not what do you want to be, what kind of lawyer do you want to be. Why did you come here? You came for a reason. You don't have to tell me, but you came for a reason. You came right out of school. You worked for 2 or 3 or 5 years and decided to stop working and go back to school. You gave up a job. Maybe you've moved away from your family. A significant other. You had a reason to come to law school. So hang on to that.
Right.
Because for you, it was a really good reason. You wouldn't be doing this otherwise. I doubt it. And if you are doing this for somebody else, well, that's a different issue. I said, you all have a reason, right? So to me, hold on to that. And I think, again, it is hard. And that's okay. You find your way. I don't know. Maybe, actually, I would love securities law. I've never tried it. So maybe if the opportunity arose, or that was the only opportunity I had to practice law, it's either do that or nothing. Okay, I'll try it. Maybe I'd love it. Right? And I think that, to me, is understand it is, you're not expected to be the lawyer who knows all and can do all immediately out of school, or after your first year, or your second year, or your third year, or, it is an evolution.
Wow.
And it's just about learning. To me, also stay open, stay curious, stay open to learning, learn from others, watch, observe,
Absolutely.
and don't be a jerk like some of those jerks we've been reading about, you know,
In class,
in
yeah.
class, which are, you know, so unbelievable. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to believe these are actual, you know, these are true
100%.
stories, but
Yeah,
they
we got a
are.
couple more questions. I think I'll ask one more about that
Yeah,
later on,
of
but
course.
I guess if you have any questions, go for it in that sense.
I was just gonna ask, what do you think is like one of the biggest weaknesses of our group of students that are entering the current legal profession? I mean,
That's a great question.
sure, we do lack the ability to maybe be ourselves, and we just discussed this, but what do you think is the biggest weakness? I mean, we could go down the AI path with this answer, and sure, like, there's plenty of things to be said there, but what do you think is the biggest weakness that you're starting to see with emerging lawyers that are entering the field?
Okay, well, first of all, it's not a lack of ability to be yourselves, because you're all quite capable of that. So remember that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And in fairness, I see you as students, so not necessarily those first couple years in the profession.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's the students who lack. I'm going to say this, and this probably isn't the right answer necessarily. I think that in some ways, law school, your law school education, could perhaps do a little better at preparing you
I completely agree.
Yeah, that's a unanimous
for the realities of practice.
9-0 Supreme Court judgment from.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what? I love reading Supreme Court cases. I love reading Court of Appeal cases. And I appreciate that, you know, the argument is always, well, we're not a training school for lawyers. It's like,
Right.
well, I don't think it has to be a training school or an academic as if one is bad and the other is. Like, I think
Yeah.
it can be that mix. Like, I think there's a lot you don't get exposure to. And I get it. It's 3 years. You have your whole first semester is required courses. You have, 4 or 5 others. You know, there isn't a lot of time. But I do think, to me, I don't think it's students at all. I think students come in eager and excited and,
Right.
you know, want to soak up every ounce of learning, and you hurry up and want to get out there and you do summer jobs. And, you know, in my day, people said, really? Why do you want to work in the summer? You're going to work in law for the rest of your life. So there were very few summer jobs.
Now it's the complete
anyway.
opposite. If you don't have a
Yeah.
summer job,
You
you're.
don't get an articling job. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that to me is, I think, and so I think back to your point, Ira, about the Law Society considering,
Right.
you know, and opening up for consultation, how do we test new lawyers differently, you know, to ensure entry-level competencies, in my view, and certainly with fingers crossed, that will back to maybe legal education itself needs to be
Absolutely.
a little bit different. I'm not saying throw it out and start again, but I just think there could be more, like you said,
Yep.
experiential learning, opportunities, externships, clinics,
Mhm.
a little more of that side. So students get a little more rounded,
Yeah.
and or specialties,
Yeah.
you know, roots.
Honestly, you know, this has been an incredible discussion, and I think to wrap it up, I would like to ask you, since you've, I guess, going back to the idea of having practiced for a long time and even just been a professor for as long as you have been, what is your personal, just biggest takeaway or learning lesson that you would take from just this entire experience from the moment you decided to pivot from journalism into law? Loaded question, but if you had to just encapsulate that.
To me, I think follow your interests, right? I think follow your interests, and it's okay that your career or your working life, you know, zigs and zags a little. Sometimes you don't know where it's going to take you. Sometimes a door closes that you really didn't want closed. So go find the open door. And that's not always easy. And, you know, sometimes you try things and they're fabulous. And I've tried some things, like gone just to a particular firm, and within a few weeks kind of gone, ooh, love the practice here, just not sure this is the place
Culture-wise,
for me.
yeah.
You know, I'll stick it out for a year, whatever it was. And, you know, so, and yet there are others who'll just stay in the same place their whole lives and love it. Love it. Or go, yeah, I just don't want to change. So you have to find what works for you. And again, that, you know, your work life isn't separate from your family, whether you end up being parents or, you know, a spouse, or you have extended family, you have other interests. That's the other thing. You know, your interests can align. If you like to play, like the fellow who went to play basketball every Thursday. Maybe he got clients out of that. Maybe he just got the joy of not thinking about, you know, his clients and his files for 3 hours every Thursday evening. But I think don't be afraid to try things and follow your interests and pursue and be curious. And maybe your practice area is this, but you're also really interested in something else, whether it's law or not. So find that organization and you go to weekly meetings or monthly events, or, because law is everywhere. And so my next move, if I can ever get there, is to be somehow involved with the Professional Women's Hockey League.
Okay,
If
we're
they're
going to
looking for,
manifest
I
it.
don't know,
We're gonna-
somebody with my brilliant legal career. I can't play hockey and I can't coach. Well, I can play, but not at that level. So I think that's just have fun, really. And I know that sounds really kind of trite and silly, but don't leave stones unturned. Don't leave
100%.
stones unturned. And there are a lot of people out there, I bet you, who will give that same sort of advice and you can have very similar conversation with. Because even though they're legal professionals and they might seem scary and they're older and they know everything, they're just people. They're just people. We're all just people. I just was born several years before the two of you. Right?
100%. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And before we wrap up, I will say, if Professor Trabucco ever does win a PWHL Cup, I want to say that congratulations. We've manifested it. This is the moment. But nonetheless, thank you so much for taking the time,
My
Professor.
pleasure.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you,
semester,
Mo. Oh,
for
yeah.
taking part in this. Really appreciate it. Ira, thank you so much for co-hosting as well.
Thanks, Ira.
Ladies and gentlemen, Billable Time. Take care.